Okay. All right. I didn't fall, neither did the camera. Everything's great. Okay, so I imagine that for a lot of you this was probably pretty confusing, right? I know I know some of you have read it before, so probably less so for you. But okay, so what gave you the most trouble with this? Those of you who did find this difficult.
There was contradictions in it.
Okay, can you give me an example, Louisa?
In verse 12, page 1293, it says that if you sacrifice to the gods all the pleasures you desire, that you'll enjoy them.
Mm-hmm.
When it says that you should release all desires and earthly pleasures.
Okay.
So I didn't understand.
Okay, so what you're saying, so sacrifice will bring you all good things, right? If you make sacrifices to the gods. But it seems to you contradictory that this is then paired up with the idea that essentially desires are bad, right? Desires are to be avoided. And I think what this comes down to is that sacrifices are essentially a selfless action, right? You sacrifice generally for the benefit of people other than yourself, right? You sacrifice to the gods, right? You give things that you could have had yourself, right? To the gods in order that they will maintain the universe, right? So you're doing something that's for the good of everybody. One of the tensions that we see here is like, you guys mentioned Buddhism and Jainism in your presentation. And it might actually be a good idea to define these because I think this tension will make a little bit more sense then, right? Buddhism and Jainism are both offshoots of the same root religion that Hinduism comes from, right? This Vedic religion. The primary difference between Buddhism and Jainism and Hinduism, at least in its earliest phases, is that these are renunciate religions. Right. They buy into that Hindu idea that when we die we're reincarnated again and again and again. But the Buddhists and the Jains argue that in this life right now, no matter what stage of it you're in, you can find a release from that eternal cycle and just go directly to nirvana, Godhead, whatever it is you want to call it, right? So salvation is possible in this particular life, not just if you've advanced to the top of the hierarchy. Yeah, Megan.
Don't they also somewhat have different goals, though, like as what the afterlife is? Like, isn't Hindu moksha and Buddhism, like moksha is joining the gods, and Buddha is becoming your own godlike creature thing?
Yeah, I mean, the descriptions of what happens are slightly different, but the basic end goal is essentially the same. What you're trying to do is not be reincarnated in the material world anymore. Exactly, yeah. The goal is to get off the wheel. And in Buddhism and in Jainism, you do this mostly through renunciation of the physical world, right? You do this primarily through renouncing material things, renouncing familial ties, right? Breaking away from that which holds you to the physical world. In Jainism, this is much more extreme than it is in Buddhism. Jains typically are strict vegans, very strict vegans. They often live in sort of small, isolated communities in monastic cells. Many of them don't even wear clothes. Right? Because the physical world drags you down. So we're seeing here a different focus than we see in other ancient world religions, right? If we think about the Greek, the Roman religion, the Babylonian religion, right? There's very little emphasis on the afterlife because the afterlife doesn't matter. But in these, what would have then been fairly new renunciate religions, the afterlife is the goal, right? A good afterlife is what you're going for. So Hinduism, at the stage it's in when the Bhagavad-gita is written, is in competition with these other two newer religions. And so it's evolving in a way to kind of offer the same thing, right? Much of what you guys were talking about are products of the old Vedic religion. And the relationship between the Vedic religion and Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism is very, very similar to the relationship between the Israelite religion and Judaism, Christianity, Islam, right? It's a precursor to faiths that developed later. The Vedic religion is based on a series of texts, the oldest of which is called the Rig Veda. And the Rig Veda was composed, scholars believe, sometime between 1500 and 1200 BCE. And mostly what it consists of are rituals, prayers, and spells designed to praise and appease a set of gods who are in most respects very similar to the Greek and Roman gods. Right? So for example, the Vedic sun god, Surya, is a guy who rides a chariot across the sky every morning and then takes it down into the underworld at night, right? Very similar to the Greco-Roman image of, Helios or Phoebus riding his team across the sky. In fact, Sanskrit, which is now pretty much just a ritual language in India, it's not really spoken much anymore, it's purely ritual and literary. Sanskrit, Latin and Greek are all fairly closely related, which points to a common cultural root. So, I think a lot of what you're noticing there, Louise, and I think, there is tension here. And I think what you're noticing is this desire to compete with these new renunciate religions without completely throwing away the old structure of the Vedic religion. Right? If we look, for example, at Arjuna's concerns at the end of chapter 1, or at the end of our excerpt from chapter 1. Page 1287. What joy for us in murdering Dhritarashtra's sons, O Krishna! For if we killed these murderers, evil like theirs would cling to us. So we cannot in justice slay our kinsmen, Dhritarashtra's sons. For having killed our people, how could we be pleased, O Madhava? Even if they, mastered by greed, are blind to the consequences of the family's destruction, of friendships lost to treachery, how are we not to comprehend that we must turn back from evil? The wrong done by this destruction is evident, O Shaker of men. For with the family destroyed, the eternal laws must persist, or must perish. And when they perish, lawlessness overwhelms the whole family. Whelmed by lawlessness, the women of the family are corrupted. From corrupted women comes the intermingling of classes. Such intermingling sends to hell the family and its destroyers. Their ancestors fall then, deprived of rice and water offerings. Those who destroy the family, who institute class mingling, cause the laws of the family and laws of caste to be abolished. So what is Arjuna worried is going to happen if he goes to war against his relatives?
Doing what they're doing is making him just as bad as they are.
Yeah, on the one hand, he's worried about accumulating bad karma, right? Now, karma literally translates to something like action, but it's really more about the way your past actions affect your present condition, right? If you have done good things, you accumulate good karma, and this good karma sort of shines out of you, right? This sort of moral force shines out of you onto others. If you have done bad things, you accumulate bad karma, and everything you touch is tainted, is impure. So what he's worried about there, is attracting bad karma, is attracting kind of negative moral power of the kind that's exerted by his relatives here. What else is he worried about? He's worried about bad karma on the... Yeah, go ahead.
He seems more concerned about the whole caste, which is like, it's even more shame on the family. Like if you ignore the
Right.
caste system.
Yeah.
So you like basically destroy the concept of what credibility the family had and the dharma.
Yeah, he's deeply concerned about the preservation of social order here. Yeah, Kayla.
Well, that makes sense because when you think about the Hindu caste system, it's a pyramid, and at the top
Yep.
is the like priests and the warriors. Which, when you get reincarnated, you're being reincarnated into a different caste. So
Right.
bad karma can bring you down, and good karma can bring you up.
Sure.
So the way that he's concerned about karma in like this aspect is it'll bring him down and farther away from God. And the common like goal of Hinduism is to get closer to Brahma.
Right. You move up the pyramid, you move up the ladder, you get closer to God. And bad karma, you're right, pulls you further away. It keeps you tied to the physical world and out of the spiritual world. So, in general, right, you accumulate good karma. When you die, you will come back as a higher form of life than what you were born as. If this could be a human of a higher caste. We'll explain the caste system in a little bit more detail in a minute. It could be an animal of some sort. And some animal forms are higher than human forms. A cow, for example, is a higher form of life than a human. Yeah, bad karma drags you down, good karma brings you up. Now the castes, and there are many different little subcastes, right? States of being, right, human, animal, mineral, vegetable, whatever, are referred to as jati. And within the jati, the states of being, are, for human beings, varnas or castes. Okay, any of you have any familiarity with the Hindu caste system, how it works? Yes?
I have a lot of experience with the caste system and especially untouchables.
Okay.
Which, those are exclusively with India, but the way that the caste systems work is whenever you're born into the system, you're there, and they try to deregulate it and make it
It's technically illegal now, yeah.
But they're still having problems with some of the people keep treating the untouchables still like they're not human.
Yeah, well, and the thing about untouchables, or as they generally prefer to be called Dalit, is that they don't have a caste, right?
Like
These are people who exist outside and thus below the caste system. People who have a caste are higher than people who do not have a caste. And Dalit, broadly speaking, would include a vast number of various types of people. It's, by and large, people who do work that would be considered ritually unclean. Basically, anybody who has to touch dead things.
Or the people who clean the bathrooms.
People who clean bathrooms, who clean the streets, people who clean up after others generally would typically be Dalit. A lot of foreigners would also, who are resident in India, would also be placed into this category, right? If you're not Indian, if you're not Hindu, right, you don't have a caste. You're outside the system. Now, above the Dalit, like the lowest caste, are the Shudras. Who traditionally were kind of general unskilled laborers, right? Like your average, peasant who is either pressed into military service or building a wall, the guy, clearing out rice in the field, that sort of thing. These are the sorts of work that Shudras would do. Above the Shudras are the Vaisya, and this is actually probably the most varied of the castes. Traditionally, the Vaisya were merchants, but it really kind of comes to mean any kind of skilled or educated professional who you pay for their services. So in addition to merchants, medical doctors, lawyers, people like that would often be of this particular caste. Yes?
Where would the margin, when we talk about, for instance, people who are in the middle class there, would they typically be in the Sundra or the one above it? I can't say that though.
The Vaisya class would be closest to probably a traditional middle class. It's not an aristocracy. So, yeah, Vaisya are people who still work for money. Above the Vaisya are the Kshatriya. Right, the warrior noble class, the aristocracy. The Kshatriya fight wars and engage in diplomacy and statecraft, primarily so that the highest caste, the Brahmins, priests and scholars, don't have to. Right, the Kshatriya fight the wars and run the country so that the Brahmins can focus on things of the mind and spirit and don't have to sully themselves with things of the world, right? The further you are from things of the world, the closer you are to purity. So this would be the scale, the human scale you would move up in order to reach salvation, right? You start at Dalit and work your way up to Brahman, right? Learning new lessons in each life. And once you've learned all there is to learn, you move on. Right, so that's Hinduism as it develops, right? It's not quite fully developed yet when the Bhagavad-gita is written. The other thing to note about this caste system, right, is that essentially, its function, it's based in part on your job function, but it's also intimately connected to who you're related to. So it's based in family ties and family connections. And this is why Arjuna is so concerned about going to war against his own relatives. Right? You break up the family, you break up the caste, and thus the cosmic order crumbles, right? Society falls apart. And what Krishna is trying to get across to Arjuna is that society isn't built on the basis Arjuna thinks it is. that society is not built on the basis of family, or even really on the basis of caste, right? Caste is essentially a sort of convenient class marker that gives you a path. This is what you're supposed to do. But the important principle underlying all creation, right, is dharma. What matters is not who you go to war against. What matters is, if you're a warrior, you fight in a just war when it occurs. What matters is that you do your duty according to your class responsibilities. At that point, it doesn't matter who you're fighting against as long as you feel you are in the right. And to give you a little bit of context here, the way the Mahabharata is set up, Arjuna's family is definitely in the right. Right? Arjuna is one of 5 brothers called the Pandavas, after their father Pandu. And none of them are actually sons of Pandu, who's a king in northwestern India. Pandu, as a young man, is out hunting, and while he does, he hears a rustling in the bushes, and he thinks it's a deer, so he shoots, and it turns out not to be a deer, but a Brahmin who is in the act of coupling with his wife. Not Pandu's wife, the Brahmin's wife. And so as the Brahmin dies, he curses Pandu and says that if Pandu ever has sex with his wife, he will die in horrible pain as well. So Pandu lives the rest of his life a celibate. But his wife has the power to invoke some of the Vedic gods. And so each of Pandu's 5 sons is in fact the son of one of these gods. Right? The eldest, Yudhisthira, is the son of Yama, who is the judge of the dead and the god of dharma. The next son, Bhima, is the son of Vayu, the wind god. And Yudhisthira is sort of the smartest, most level-headed, and most spiritually oriented of the brothers. Bhima is a sort of great, big, comical man of enormous strength who fights with a club. Arjuna, the third brother, is the son of Indra, the storm god, and the remaining brothers, Nakula and Sahadeva, are twins who are sons of a pair of star gods called the Ashvids. And each of these brothers represents the values of a different caste. They're all technically Kshatriya, but they all represent the values of a particular caste. So Yudhisthira is the ideal Brahmin. Bhima is an ideal Shudra. Nakula and Sahadeva, twins who have a variety of different skills, represent the Vaishyas. And Arjuna is supposed to be the ideal Kshatriya. So the hero of the Bhagavad-gita, this small portion of the Mahabharata, small that still takes 8 hours to perform in its entirety. That's just the Bhagavad-gita, not the whole Mahabharata, right? The Mahabharata is friggin' huge. And so Arjuna, by refusing to fight, is dodging the duty of his class to fight in a just war. Right? They're cousins, the Kauravas have usurped a kingdom from them and have agreed to give it back to them if the 5 Pandava brothers meet certain conditions, all of which they go and meet. The Kauravas decide, no, we're still not going to give up the kingdom. So Krishna, avatar of the god Vishnu and friend of Arjuna, tries to act as intermediary, negotiate a peace. That fails. So all of those avenues have been tried. Now it's time for war. And Arjuna sees his friends and relatives lined up to fight against him. Right. And he loses heart. Because he's worried about the damage to the social order that this will do. Now, what advice does Krishna give him to try to get him over this? What do you make of sort of what Krishna says in response to Arjuna's difficulties? What's the first thing that Krishna says to try to settle him down? Page 1288. The Lord said, "Although you seem to speak wisely, you have mourned those not to be mourned. The wise do not grieve for those gone, or for those who are not yet gone. There was no time when I was not, nor you, nor these lords around us. And there will never be a time henceforth when we shall not exist. The embodied one passes through childhood, youth, and then old age, then attains another body. In this the wise are undeceived." So, why should Arjuna not be worried about going to war against his relatives?
It's not knowing anymore.
Yeah, he can't actually destroy them, right? What Krishna is expostulating here, right, is a sort of doctrine of the immortality of the soul, right? That bodies may change, but the soul remains constant. The soul is eternal. Right? The Hindu word for soul is Atma. You can't really, according to this logic, kill anyone, because their soul will move on into a new form, a new body, depending on the karma they've accumulated in life. Yeah.
The one thing I don't understand about that is, like, if you were, like, let's say, for instance, you're on a lower caste and you kill someone on the upper caste, wouldn't that be part of your karma, even though their soul itself would still exist?
Yeah, your reasoning for killing another person does come into play, right? If what you are doing is against your dharma, then yeah, you accumulate bad karma for that. But if you are acting in accordance with your duty, even if you are someone of a lower caste, you know, killing someone of a higher caste, right? If this in some way accords with your social duty, then, you know, for example, like perhaps a, you know, if a Shudra kills a Kshatriya who's ruling as a tyrant, right? Then that act is not going to accumulate bad karma. As long as you're acting in accordance with your dharma. And that's part of the point here, is that as a warrior, Arjuna's dharma is to fight, not to avoid fights. You know, not to fight unnecessarily, not to fight for bad causes, but when the cause comes a-calling, he's expected to answer. And he's not to worry about what's going to happen to the souls of people that he can't actually destroy. Right? Righting this particular wrong is more important than individual lives that will just return in another form anyway. is this starting to make a little bit more sense yet? Okay, good. So is there others? Is there anything? Is there any others? Yeah. Pardon me. Is there other specific stuff that I could clear up for you?
So it's not that he's fighting his brothers, but he's fighting his cousins.
Yeah, he's fighting cousins, uncles, essentially his mother's whole family. The Kauravas are cousins on the maternal side. So this is a family conflict, and this is problematic. But Arjuna is making it problematic in a way Krishna is trying to tell him it isn't. Right, that the things Arjuna is worried will happen if he does act will be worse if he doesn't act. Right, so Krishna is an aspect of the god Vishnu. Right, Vishnu is the Hindu god that essentially preserves the cosmic order. Right, that's his role. That's his job. He's part of a sort of trinity in Hinduism that are really all faces of the same principle, faces of the same divine concept, right? You got Brahma, who creates the universe, then basically steps back and falls asleep. His role is done. Vishnu preserves the universe in its current state, right? Keeps it from falling apart, ensures that dharma is followed until it's time for Shiva, the destroyer, to come in and do his work and end the current universe. At which point, the cycle starts again. The concept of time in Hinduism generally is cyclical. Everything comes back around. The universe that we live in now is only one of many universes that have already been, and many others that will be in the future. Right? We're neither the first nor the last in the cycle. Right? Brahma begins the cycle, Vishnu preserves it, Shiva destroys it. None of these gods is really regarded as entirely good or entirely evil. They're basically the same god. Right? They're referred to as the Trimurti when taken as a unit. And Vishnu defends the order of the universe, sometimes directly, by coming down and taking a physical form. What's called an avatar. Right, this is where we get that word for the little icon that represents you in various online forums, right? Your avatar. It's your manifestation in the World Wide Web. It comes from this Sanskrit term, Vishnu's manifestation in the physical world. And as our presentation group noted, there have been 10, I think, and will be an 11th, right? There'll be a final manifestation before the universe is destroyed. But Krishna is one of these avatars. So Krishna is a god, and the other characters in the epic know that he's a god, right? They're aware of this, but he is in most other respects treated in the epic like a human being. He's friendly with all of the Pandava brothers, particularly with Arjuna. So yeah, Arjuna is speaking to a god here and is completely aware of this. Yeah, Kayla.
Can we go to the part where he reveals himself to Arjuna?
Sure. Can you take us there?
Yeah, page 1050.
Yes.
I'm kind of confused by the last lines.
Uh-huh.
Not by setting the Vedas or even by austerities,
Mm-hmm.
and not by gifts or sacrifice may I be seen as you saw me. What makes Arjuna so special?
Well, yeah, essentially that Krishna has chosen to reveal himself to Arjuna for a particular purpose, mostly to sort of buck up Arjuna's resolve, right? So if we look at what it looks like when Krishna reveals his form, right, page 1298, the blessed Lord said, O son of Pritha, look upon my hundredfold, no thousandfold forms various and celestial, forms of diverse shapes and colors. Behold the Adityas and Vasus, the Rudras, Ashvins, and Maruts, many unseen previously. Behold these wonders, Arjuna. Here behold all the universe, beings moving and motionless, standing as one in my body and all else that you wish to see. Because you are unable to behold me with your mortal eye, I give you one that is divine. Behold my majestic power. And after saying this, O king, Vishnu, the great lord of yoga, revealed his supreme, majestic form to him, the son of Pritha. That form has many eyes and many mouths, and many wonders visible, with many sacred ornaments and many sacred weapons raised. Clothed in sacred wreaths and garments with many sacred fragrances, and comprising every wonder, the infinite, omniscient God. If in the sky 1,000 suns should have risen all together, the brilliance of it would be like the brilliance of that great souled one. And then the son of Pandu saw the universe standing as one, divided up in diverse ways, embodied in the God of gods. So essentially here, when Krishna reveals himself to Arjuna, what does Arjuna see? Yeah, this is the whole universe, right? Krishna shows his true form to Arjuna, and Krishna is everything. This entire universal system that Vishnu preserves and that Arjuna is a part of it, right? So, Arjuna may be a very, very important human being and a very powerful human being. But he is just one small man in an infinite universe. Now, how do we usually, well, maybe we don't have any direct experience of this. How do you imagine you would react if suddenly confronted with infinity?
Shock.
Yeah, you'd probably freak the fuck out, right? This is something that our minds are not generally prepared for, right?
But that's what Krishna says, that like you can't see me with your eyes, so I'm
Yeah.
giving you one
I'm,
so that you can
exactly.
see.
I'm giving you this special glimpse of your place in the universe for just this one time so that you understand something of your purpose and where you fit into this great big giant puzzle. Yeah.
I kind of like his answer though. Like he says, his mind quakes in terror.
Uh-huh.
Show me your human form, have mercy.
Yeah, this is way too much.
Like he's like, I mean, it's almost like an acid trip gone wrong or something like
Mhm.
that. He's like, stop, please, just go back to how you were. And it doesn't happen.
Yeah. It's like, okay, yep, I get it. Right? Thank you for that. But can we return to this sort of human-to-human footing here? Right? Father of all the worlds, the still and moving, you are what it worships and its teacher. With none your match, how could there be one greater in the three worlds, O power without equal? Making obeisance, lying in prostration, I beg your indulgence, praiseworthy ruler. As father to son, as one friend to another, as lover to beloved, show your mercy. I am pleased to have seen what has never been seen before, yet my mind quakes in its terror. Show me, O God, your human form. Have mercy, O Lord of gods, abode of all the cosmos. I wish to see you even as I did once, wearing a diadem with mace and discus. Assume that form now wherein you have 4 arms, of 1,000-armed, of every form the master. By the way, does anybody know why Hindu gods are often depicted as having 4 arms?
Doesn't it have something to do with animals?
Actually, it has nothing to do with animals. You'll usually see that the 2 of the arms are facing front, and the other two arms are facing back. The two arms in front show the god's actions in the physical world, and the two arms in back act in the spiritual world. So they'll usually be holding various kinds of objects that have some kind of symbolic meaning, like a sword to fight off demons, a lotus flower for healing, or rosary beads for meditation, things of that nature.
But isn't the most famous one like a million arms? Like they have like arms everywhere.
Yeah, and that is often like a demonstration of the god's power in this realm or in other realms, right? It's most statues you'll find have 4 arms, but there are you'll see some statues, for example, of the goddess Kali, where she will have more than 4 arms. But yeah, the basic principle is the same, right? The arms in the front act in the physical world, the arms in the back act in the spiritual world. But I think, to get at your question here, Kayla, I think what Krishna is talking about here is that you don't actually get to this vision of infinity by doing the things that the Vedas tell you to do. Right? So following these old traditional ways isn't going to get you this glimpse of infinity and this glimpse of your place in it, right? At best, what it does is maintain things as they are. If you want closer contact to the divine, what it takes is the practice of true devotion, right? This is one of the forms of yoga that Krishna discusses with Arjuna throughout the poem. We don't get too much of this because it's a small excerpt, but basically he describes 3 kinds of yoga. And when we talk about yoga here, we're talking about the Sanskrit meaning of the word as discipline, not as a form of exercise that is often practiced in very warm, dark rooms by Westerners on mats wearing tight pants. In fact, there are a lot of people in India who are really kind of annoyed, sometimes more than annoyed, by Western yoga practice, because it tends to ignore the religious aspects and the cultural specificity of it. But yes, the 3 kinds of yoga that Krishna outlines are karma yoga, which is discipline in action. Jnana yoga, right? Discipline in mind, in knowledge. And bhakti yoga, discipline in devotion. The giving of sacrifices as well would be an example of bhakti yoga, right? Of devotion to the gods, of devotion to principles higher than yourself. When Krishna's talking about disinterested action, right? Action without worrying about the consequences, action without worrying about its fruits. What he's talking about there is karma yoga, right? Discipline in action. When he's talking about, cultivating wisdom, retreating into the self, right? Finding knowledge, finding wisdom there. He's talking about jnana yoga there. Right, so all 3 of these pop up in various small ways in the excerpts you've got here. There is a long portion in the middle of the poem in which these are outlined in great detail. But yeah, it's through these practices, right? It's through these various kinds of discipline that Krishna is arguing you will achieve divinity, or you will be able to touch divinity, right? It's through these practices that you move up, not through following the old rituals. All right, so what other questions do you guys have about this? What else were there other points you find, you still find a little unclear or confusing? This is helping? Clear things up? Okay. So what else? What else you got? What else is giving you trouble?
Okay, last one.
Go for it.
Okay, so is he the only one that has this power to do this? Because on the last page again, it says, "Even
Uh-huh.
the gods are forever the series to sing." So would that kind of make him one of the more important gods?
Yeah, Krishna being Vishnu is extremely important. And there's a branch of Hinduism that is pretty much sort of solely devoted to Krishna. In fact, like the branch of Hinduism that's most familiar in the West and tends to be followed mostly by shaven-headed white people wearing orange robes is a specific form of devotion to Krishna, right? So if you're ever walking around in a big city and someone with a shaved head offers to give you a copy of the Bhagavad-gita, if you'll hang out and talk with them for a bit, if they insist that you say Garanga, which means be happy, you have met one of these people. They were all over Scotland when I was doing I did a year abroad in 1998 in Glasgow, and they were all over Glasgow, and it's really, really interesting to watch Scottish people interact with Hare Krishnas who are telling them to be happy. Yeah.
I mean, did it go well? It doesn't sound like it would.
There was a lot of shouting.
Oh, that's funny pictures.
Here's the Scottish dialect seems to be mostly made up of creative slang terms for the human anatomy that are almost never applied to the actual parts of the anatomy, almost exclusively applied to people. So yeah, Scotland's fun. Scotland's a great place. But I digress. So Krishna is an extremely important figure, particularly in the branch of Hinduism that is called Vaishnava, or devotion to Vishnu. The other major branches are Shaivism, right, which is devotion to Shiva, devotion to not so much maintaining the order, but to encouraging change. And there is also a branch called Shaktism, which focuses not on the members of the Trimurti, but on their consorts, right, their female counterparts. So Shaktism worships the feminine principle in creation rather than the masculine. Now you may notice that there is no branch of Hinduism devoted primarily to the worship of Brahma, because once the universe is created, Brahma no longer takes an active role in it. Right? He exists solely to make the universe, and then he goes away. And the other aspects of self take over. Okay. Other questions? Anything else you guys got? Anything else that's bugging you about this? So can we see how this arises out of specific historical, cultural circumstances? And yeah, what we're doing here is, we're seeing a religion in transition from an old traditional religion based on, sacrifice, based on gods who embody natural forces, to gods that offer the possibility of personal salvation. Right. This is a historical process we see moving across the world in the period that this takes place. We're not entirely sure when the Bhagavad-gita was composed. It's sometime between 500 BCE and 100 CE. We know that it's added to the Bhagavad-gita, to the Mahabharata by 100 CE. It's not an original part of that epic. Yeah, Megan.
One of the things I'm a little
Uh-huh.
I thought that the Hindus don't like actually have like a physical, I keep wanting to say Bible, but that's not what I mean. Like I thought they don't have like
Well,
a physical thing like that.
They no, well, and they don't. At least not so much in the way that the Bible is like a single set of scriptures for Christians. But one thing we need to remember is that even Christian Bibles vary widely from denomination to denomination. Right? There are books in a Catholic Bible that don't appear in a Protestant Bible. There are books in the Bible of the Coptic Church in Egypt or the Ethiopian Orthodox Church that don't appear in any other traditions' Bibles, right? So sacred scriptures do sort of vary widely even within the same religion. But there are sets of sacred scriptures in Hinduism, the Vedas being the oldest, right? The fact that the Bhagavad-gita sort of supersedes them a bit doesn't mean that people don't read the Vedas anymore or practice those rituals. They still do. Again, much like Christians still read the Jewish scriptures, even though they don't typically practice all of the laws that are described in, like, say, the book of Leviticus, right? Partly, for reasons of practicality. It is simply not practical for a man to sacrifice a rooster after every time he has sex, right? It is not practical to make your wife live in a tent in the backyard while she is menstruating, right? It is not practical to not wear blended fabrics. So there are certain rules that fall by the wayside. There are certain practices that fall by the wayside. But yeah, now they do have a set of sacred scriptures. Most religions do have, even if not a single book, some set of sacred scriptures. And this would actually be an important difference between the ancient Indian religion, the Vedic religion, and those Greek and Roman traditions, right, that did not have, those earlier pagan traditions that did not have any specific scripture. Really just sort of a set of stories that are told about deities interfering with human beings. But no, they do have certain prescribed ways you're supposed to interact with divinity that is laid out in books. All right, so anybody have anything else? Okay, one more thing that I do want to lay out for all of you. I want to wish all of you a happy Lupercalia. Does anybody have any idea what I'm talking about?
Sounds familiar.
And Valentine's Day, it was
Yes.
a fertility festival.
Yes. The holiday we celebrate as Valentine's Day was called Lupercalia by the Romans. It's the festival of the wolf. It was a fertility festival, as most of them were. And what would happen on Lupercalia, right, is young aristocratic Roman men would run around naked in the streets, slapping women with wolf skins in order to make them fertile in the coming year. And so, yeah, this is a tradition we should revive, right? So so go home, grab your wolf skin, and get running around Americus and see how long it takes you to get arrested. But yeah, it's I guess one of my favorite things to do is shatter other people's cherished illusions. But it's also, I think it's interesting to note how we sanitize and clean up a lot of these ancient holidays that have darker roots than we tend to realize. All right, so I have some reading questions for you for next time for Confucius.